Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Sara. Sara, how are you doing this fine Wednesday afternoon?
I'm doing very well. I'm just trying to keep the sounds of the suburb at bay. You know, the bowing and the angle
As,
grinding and
as am I. Although I think the lawn has just been mowed, so hopefully it's not going to be too noisy.
don't worry, they're
Um,
going to start mowing somebody else's lawn.
Inevitably. And of course, we're also joined by Mr. Michael Morris. Michael, how are you? How's Cape Town?
All good, thank you. Nice and sunny. We had a thunderstorm in the early hours of the morning, very unusual for Cape Town, and a bit of rain, but no gardening happening today anywhere in the neighbourhood. So quite peaceful and quiet.
Excellent stuff.
Quite pleasant.
Well, I see our one of our regular viewers, David, says that yesterday I remember him saying in the comments that Cyril was going to call a family meeting, and the family meeting was indeed called. So bells for David there. But let's get into the news today. I don't think it's worth talking about the changes to the COVID regulations because, as we said yesterday, it's all silly moving, the dots on eyes to other eyes and just silliness. Anyway, this story, when I saw it last night, actually made my jaw fall open because it is the perfect encapsulation of sort of the incompetence that plagues our state. So this comes, of course, from my favorite minister in the ANC cabinet, Sihle Zikalala, never shy to speak his mind, who told Parliament in response to some questions that Prasa, that is the rail SOE, had 3,000 ghost workers. In other words, people who were receiving full salaries but don't appear to have existed. Now, according to the story here and what Sara has told me, Prasa has about 17,000 workers. So this is like 20%-ish of their entire workforce are people who don't exist. Sihle Zikalala said, this is how broken Prasa is. In a normal company, you can't afford to have one ghost worker. We have 3,000. And since December, a stoppage was done on paying those people. So apparently how they found out that, in fact, all 3,000 of these were ghost workers was they just stopped paying the suspected ghost workers in December, and then no one came forward to complain. So they assumed that they got them all. Not the most scientific process, but whatever. But of course it gets worse because Sihle Zikalala revealed that they have not only 3,000 ghost workers, so people who don't exist but were being paid, but they also have a vacancy rate of 19%, including a number of critical positions, such as the Group Chief Executive Officer, who's actually currently filled with an acting position. So Prasa is in a state, it seems. And it does make me wonder, how common are ghost workers across the larger the government, across all of our government departments, all of our SOEs? I think it's something that we should look into. So, Michael, let me start with you. What do you make of what this was said and what Sihle Zikalala is saying? I mean, he kind of talks about this like he's an opposition politician sometimes.
Indeed. You've already mentioned it. Certainly, one of my favorite lines was the one where he says that Prasa stopped paying the salaries in December. No one came forward complaining about not being paid, which does seem an extraordinary way to do your forensic sort of investigation of paying presumably hundreds of thousands of rands needlessly into the ether. But the other line, of course, is he's saying, in a normal company, you can't afford to have one ghost worker. We have 3,000, and since December, a stoppage was done on paying those people. Well, this is really the point. South Africa simply cannot afford to have all these, 700 odd SOEs. Not all of them are as bad as Prasa, but that are functioning unlike any normal company, and that are quite likely ploughing ahead, paying people who don't exist, or paying people who are not actually working for them. They might well be, real people at the end of these payments. They likely are. but who are not contributing at all. And the first thought that came to my mind when I read the story, when you drew my attention to it this morning, Nick, was the piece from just a little bit earlier this month, where we now the 23rd. Well, this is from the 11th of March. A piece, very fascinating piece by Ground Up. The headline: "No trains operating in the Eastern Cape for over 2 months." And it turns out that Prasa, I think we'd covered this, in fact, in an earlier Daily Friend show, but Prasa says that because of operational challenges, in quotes, its words, it simply decided to stop running trains in the Eastern Cape on January the 7th. And it's absolutely no surprise if they are paying 3,000 people who are not actually working for them. So extraordinary.
Yeah, and considering the method by which they detect them, I wouldn't be surprised if there are in fact more, and they just haven't done a proper. It just shows us that the management is completely broken.
Astonishing.
And kind of on that point, so the minister alleged that he thinks the reason for this is because someone in HR was basically pulling a scam where they put all these people on the books as employees and then was collecting the salaries themselves illegally. And I think that this really is actually South Africa's one of its biggest problems. This and crime, basically, and the fact that our police force doesn't work, is that we've got a civil service which is nothing but a resource extraction enterprise. It's a civil service which, and you can look at any SOE, you can look at any government department, whether you go to Home Affairs, whether you go to Prasa, whether you go to Eskom, there are an awful lot of people who are there to just take as much as they can out of the system. And hiring, and they seem to be very keen on hiring people like themselves who won't squeal on the corruption. Sara, what do you make of this this whole story? I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, as Michael said, it's not. Or you said it's not unusual. You have incidents like this coming out of the public sector all the time, and you don't have it coming out of the private sector all the time because management has an absolute vested interest in whether there are people being paid who don't exist or not.
Fikile Mbalula himself said it. In a normal company, you can't afford to have one ghost worker.
He's getting there. He's getting there. No, I think we've now solved the problem as to why Prasa has stopped operating, because there's no one to operate them. They're ghosts. The ghosts are running Prasa, or not running Prasa, or I don't know, flowing through the windows, or I don't know what they do, but it is absolutely symptomatic of everything that's wrong. And I mean, I'm still trying to get a handle on I've read over the years about Prasa and it's various malaises, if they such a thing. But one is to take so long to pick it up. That's very much part of the public service problem. And the fact that it's happening has to be symptomatic of absolutely everything that is wrong. And we now have in fact, perhaps that's probably what COVID did for us. That sort of having to stop business and adjust. They couldn't do it, and so nothing got done, and it just absolutely exposed over and above what has already been exposed by by investigative journalism. So that's why I'm not surprised. I mean, between the cadre deployment linked to the BEE, etc., etc. It probably has almost a multiplier effect. If you have the one, you'll lead to the other, will lead to the other. We'll have, as you say, the scam running in the human resources department. And of course, the problem is that it's not their money. They have no vested interest in whether the money comes in as, hopefully as profit, or doesn't come in at all, because they just keep going for, they need a bailout. They'll go for it until they say no. But now to not have a passenger rail system, I mean, is just inconceivable, given, and whatever you may feel about the colonialists, railways, they did well. And if you live in a country that inherited a railway system, you had huge advantages. And I think so. That's one of the things South Africa had a huge advantage over the rest of the continent, is a very extensive, sophisticated rail network. You come in as a government, you just pick it up and you take it on and you run with it. It's yours.
Right, and I think Prasa's importance to the country has become a lot more apparent to me over recent months. I know that there are some mines which are not able to export everything they want to, not because they're not pulling it out of the ground, but simply because the rail system is too broken. One of the reasons that our roads are so dangerous is that we have so many trucks on the road because they can't take things by rail. And there's a lot of very poor South Africans who have to take taxis, but it actually would be cheaper and easier for them to use passenger rail, because even though our passenger rail system's not great, it's okay. It's better than nothing. There are some places, particularly on the edges of like Joburg, that it's very useful. But a lot of those systems don't work now. The stations have been robbed or... Sorry, go ahead, Sara.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, one of the things, of course, is you have to wonder to what extent all those small contractors who own coal trucks and provide coal to Eskom, what part did that whole process play in sort of abandoning the railway, the Transnet system, and therefore the roads,
exactly.
et cetera.
And I'm sure, taxi drivers have probably had something to do with the fact that the passenger trains keep getting burned all over the country, particularly in the Western Cape. Michael, any final thoughts on this before we move on?
It was just the point that Sara raised, and I think it's a very important one, is linking this, even if tangentially, to BEE and cadre deployment. It just so happens this morning the IRR put out a press release on the latest employment equity amendment bill, which we think is a very dangerous thing, because what it's going to do, if Sara Ramaphosa decides not to veto it at this point and send it back, if it becomes law, what it will do is to extend the dysfunction that we see in the public sector into the private sector. It sets standards, quotas, and so on for the private sector. So in fact, it is transferring all these problems. And right at the very top of this press release this morning, the framer of the draft of it, Gabriel Prasa, head of campaigns at the IRR, pulls out a comment by the former trade unionist Ibrahim Harvey, in a Business Live piece, I think earlier this week, in which he makes this point: if you listen carefully to the testimonies of the Zondo Commission, the structural links between corruption on one hand and BEE and ANC cadre deployment on the other is unquestionably clear and in fact endemic. And I think that this brings out very strongly the point Sara has made there, that this is not something in isolation. It's not just Prasa, it's not just ghost employees, it's part of this kind of larger issue.
I think that's a very good point to make, because so often when South Africans talk about what's wrong with the country, they say, oh, there's bad people in charge. Well, yeah, but the problem in a lot of ways is that we've made very specific choices which have created specific structures which have poisoned the well. And BE is one of them, cadre deployment is another one. And like you say, the way those go hand in hand are really what messes the stuff up. Anyway, let us move on to our next story today. And this is yet more troubling news. Sorry, I saw someone saying, is there any good news?
Good news, no.
There really isn't. ANC Premier of KZN, Sihle Zikalala, has said that he was speaking, I think, at a function about drug abuse or something, but he gave a speech where he said that he thinks that this whole constitutional democracy thing we've got going, it's really kind of standing in the way of transformation in the country. He thinks that the courts are interfering with the process of rooting out structural inequity in the country, and that really we should start at least think about moving towards parliamentary democracy like the United Kingdom. And that this will allow us, if we got rid of the constitution, which isn't really working for us, it will allow Parliament to finally make the changes we want in order to change the country in, I presume, all sorts of positive ways. Now, I think everyone sensible should have a terrible, chilling shiver go down their spine at this very prospect. It is indeed true that the UK is a country which doesn't have a formal written constitution, and yet it still maintains pretty high level of democracy and freedom. But there are a lot of kind of complicated, murky institutions and precedents in law and traditions of changing governments for literally hundreds of years through free elections that South Africa does not have. And so, in effect, what I suspect Premier Zikalala is saying here is that he's really not so keen on this whole democracy idea. I don't know. Am I being unfair? Sara, let me start with you. What do you make?
I think a lot of people have voiced that. Lindiwe Sisulu was one of them, and essentially they're saying the Constitution gets in the way. They pretend that the Constitution was foisted upon the ANC, whereas in fact the ANC played the dominant role in the negotiation of that Constitution. And it's simple. Basically, the Constitution is the legal basis upon which we are protected from our politicians. And that's the problem. We're protected. We are often protected, not always, but we are often protected. And it doesn't suit Sihle Zikalala because it gets in the way of what the ANC wants to do. And what the ANC wants to do is, by definition, neither constitutional nor democratic. I think it's partly a sign of a desperation that whatever they're doing isn't achieving the results they need or the results they want, and it sort of works into the pursuit of the national democratic revolution, which is essentially the march towards a socialist utopia and all the horrors that invokes. And so I think it really is that. I mean, Zikalala's particular complaint was that the courts keep finding against the ANC. Well, hello, yes, because the ANC keeps contravening the Constitution. I mean, I'm saying that rather broadly. But remember, Zikalala is very much a RET faction guy. And so it goes with the whole line that Zuma keeps touting about, the courts being against him, and so therefore they're against that faction of the ANC. So unless everyone signs up to this, it's going to be the RET faction versus the other faction on the Constitution. And I think it's very difficult for I can only call it non-RET faction because it's not really a transformation faction, cannot afford to let that slip. I mean, that would be disastrous for it. Perhaps I can conclude by making a very nasty little remark that Sihle Zikalala, sorry, not Snooky, that was the journalist, Sihle Zikalala, is as stupid as he is short.
Right.
We don't have to call the program there.
So, of course, one of the other things that was said by Lindiwe Sisulu, who recently attacked, the courts and everything in a letter a while ago, in January, said that the Constitution is neoliberal. And neoliberal is one of those terms which, when you hear someone use it, it's almost always them arguing in some sort of bad faith or against a straw man, because neoliberal tends to mean something I don't like.
Yeah,
it's one of those garbage phrases. Michael, I guess worth maybe talking a little bit about why a proper free liberal democracy actually requires some anti-democratic safeguards, which is what the Constitution is. The Constitution is anti-democratic. It says that 50% plus one of the population can't just decide to pass anything it likes. Do you want to talk about that at all? And also, what are your thoughts generally on what the Premier is saying and doing here?
I mean, one of the things, of course, that I thought of immediately was that we've seen this before from the ANC's race nationalist predecessors, when in the National Party spent much of the 1950s also confronting what it would have considered to be a deeply anti-transformational court, when it was trying to get coloured people off the voters' roll, and it went much further than, fortunately, than the ANC has gone thus far. Let's hope the ANC doesn't think of these things, but in packing the Senate and then packing the court and appointing its own people and making sure that after years and years of repeated defeats or two at least, I think, in the Supreme Court, it eventually won the day and managed to get its way. And yeah, I mean, I think what it reflects, certainly reflects factional tension, I guess, in the ruling party. But we know from the ANC's behaviour over the past quarter of the century that it doesn't like not getting its way, and it equates not getting its way with a deficiency nationally. You know, it's anti-national interest if the ANC doesn't get its way, which is quite wrong. And your point, Nicholas, absolutely, that that the national interest is actually served by this tension between the interests of the duly elected, democratically chosen governing party, and the interests of the people. There needs to be that tension. And it is a kind of ironic in a way, but it's central to Republican democracy.
Right. The American founding fathers were very good on this point. This is one of the reasons they created their upper chamber, the Senate, to be so powerful. Is they had this idea that, democracy was good, but that people can be sort of, I think the phrase they use is their passions can get a hold of them, and people can rally behind an idea that within a few years they think to themselves, "No, wait a second, why did we do that?" And by then they could have, voted themselves into slavery. So yeah, I think it's a point that we don't talk about enough in one of the things that makes democracy good.
Yeah.
Sara, any final thoughts before we move on?
Just to put emphasis on the point Michael made about the fact that about becoming a parliamentary democracy, the ANC is once again, and the other areas where they do it, where they're essentially mimicking the Nats. And that alone, if you draw all the lessons to be learned from the horrors of the apartheid era, that alone should be, it says everything that one should be worried about.
Yeah.
Right, and as we should also point out, the Constitution, if you're really upset with it, can be changed. There is a process. It requires a lot of consensus, and there actually are enough parties in the country, as we've seen in the expropriation thing, to change the Constitution, but they can't agree because it's actually not such a great idea. But anyway, let's move on to our final topic for today, and this is about the Uber, Bolt, Taxify protest strike that's going on at the moment. So the e-hailing services drivers, or at least a group claiming to represent them, I think they're called Unity and Diversity, has been yesterday embarked on a 3-day strike against various companies and government in South Africa, saying that the e-hailing companies across the board are all competing with each other. They're not ensuring the safety of their drivers, and they're not paying them enough. I think they're currently marching to the union buildings, but there was an interesting incident yesterday, which to me was very worrying, and that is that apparently, according to a report on Eyewitness News, a off-duty police officer was driving, and some of these strikers thought that he might in fact be a Uber driver who was not complying with the strike, and so they forced him to pull over, and they demanded that he provide them with identification. He refused to do so, drew his gun, and then ended up, there was a fight and almost shot them, and they ended up getting arrested, the strikers. Now, this was condemned by the organizers of the strike, who said they wanted a peaceful protest. But this, to me, is just so typical of the problem in South African labor culture and strike culture, is that every strike we have, there has not been a strike in this country for a very long time where there was not extreme amounts of violent intimidation involved in making sure that people who didn't agree with the strike couldn't go to it, didn't scab, as the strikers say. There's no process by which people can secretly vote for whether they want to go on a strike or not. In fact, I don't think this industry in particular is properly unionized. And yet, if I tried to order an Uber now, I probably can't get one. And look, anecdotally, I've talked to a lot of Uber drivers whenever I've taken a drive with them. I often ask them about how's the business, how do you feel about being an Uber driver? And I must say the vast majority of them are really keen on the idea. They say, look, I mean, I can make quite a lot of money and I work on my time and I do it when I want. So I'm not sure if these guys really are representative of the whole industry. But anyway, Michael, what do you make of this issue? What do you make of the potential violence in the strike?
A lot of different issues, I think, here in this case. One of the first things that strikes me is, I think anybody in the transport business, motor transport business, and particularly Uber drivers, I've had a very similar experience to you. I always talk to them when I travel. Not that I've traveled a great deal with COVID over the COVID period, but is that people will often speak very highly of their flexibility and that they get out of it as much as they put in. If they work long hours and they work strategically, they're likely to get a good income. But two things I do recall being told about, certainly over the past year and a half, I guess, would be the pressure of fuel prices going up, and that they have to work extra hard to pay their fuel bill before they can start earning any money. And just looking at Jonathan Katzenellenbergen's piece this morning on the Daily Friend about the economic shock that's set off by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's huge pressure on fuel prices, food prices, and so on. So one has a sense that with the strikes like this Uber strike, e-hailing strike, it's likely to be the sort of thing that we might see more and more of as people come under greater pressure. I was interested to see in one story that somebody from one of the strikers said that countries around the world had done well to regulate the e-hailing industry, but not South Africa. I don't unfortunately know anything about that, but that might be quite interesting, is to know a bit more about the difference between how the industry is managed here compared to perhaps in Europe.
I'm not sure if that's true. I know in a lot of places the sort of entrenched vested interests, the kind of taxi cab organizations, actually managed to get Uber banned in a bunch of places. I think there are parts of I think New York might even have Uber's banned.
Really?
I may be wrong on that. Anyway, so, Sara, your thoughts on this? One of the things that makes me worry about this is that I fear that they're going to accidentally get government to regulate them out of a job.
Yeah. Look, I think the problem is that we don't know. We don't know if it's disgruntled workers or whether it's guys who are not very good at their jobs or don't promote themselves enough. Whether it's the way they are treated by the people who employ them. I don't know how they work. The bottom line is that in a sea of government employment. And the taxi drivers, I think they're only subject to minimum wage. I don't think there's much after that. It's the private sector, and what you want is the private sector, and that doesn't stop them from unionizing and making demands and negotiating wages, and perhaps coming to a way to how to deal with petrol price increases. But the idea of being you can be fairly sure in this country that if it is regulated, essentially it becomes a state industry. It will not be the flexible product that consumers enjoy using at present. And I mean, of course, it should be open to the entire country to allow the free market to operate. But here, you can understand the desperation in the one sense, in that there are very few alternatives because so little space is given to the free market and to encourage people to start businesses. But because they're not represented by a union, I mean, we just don't know. We just don't know. And usually unions are used to pretty much following the rules. You can't be guaranteed how they'll behave in a strike, but after a process has been followed, these guys probably don't know very much about the labor law requirements or processes in the country. So it's a bit. As I say, I suspect we don't know enough, but I suspect it would be a lesser service for the consumer in the long run if it does get regulated.
Yeah, I think one of their demands was on they wanted to have parity with the regulations in the taxi industry, or at least the not the minibus taxi industry, but the sort of call-up taxi industry. And
well, of course, the answer to that is they should deregulate the standard taxi industry.
Right, but I really like your point about fuel costs and that stuff, because Michael, because this is, at the end of the day, when people are under stress, they start to kind of look for any avenue they can to rescue themselves in the situation. And this is the direct consequence of the government spending money badly and jacking up our fuel taxes, quite frankly. This is what it looks like. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to thedailybriend.co.za, check us out, read our stuff there. It's always got interesting new things on it every single day. And we hope that you enjoyed the show. We will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.